Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are joining me live in what is clearly Denmark. I am here amid the acquisition of all the players inside the top 20 by the Astralis organization. Zipnix, pronounced Zipex, has been quoted with saying, "I'm fairly confident in this move. It's going to level the playing field at the upper echelons of Counter-Strike, and we will continue to use the same five-man roster moving forwards." Back to you in the studio, Skriv. Thank you very much, Skriv. Welcome back to the 6 o'clock screws with me, Skriv. We've got another interview coming up for you, and today it is Vu. And I am so excited for this, honestly. This interview for me is part of why, I wanted to get these going, get them kicked off, really break into some of the more astounding things that maybe people think about their chosen field and their chosen game and whatnot. We do touch a little bit on the content side of things. For those of you that don't know, Vu is a YouTuber within the CS space. 150,000 he's just hit recently, 150,000 subscribers. So a very successful YouTuber within the CS space for sure. And he's made a bit of a transition doing some analyst work recently. We touch on that. But the main crux of things is some of his coaching work that he's done in the past, particularly how he approaches that, what he thinks about that, and some of the, I guess, different perspectives that he's had. He coached a team under a poker player, and approaching the game from like a poker point of view is something that they tried together and whatnot. And it's really, really interesting when we get into it. So if you're into all that, the statistical, the analytical side of things, certainly I would stick around and make sure you watch that. Obviously, I've got the chapters now, guys, so you can skip straight along to it if you wish. But either way, without further ado, let's get into the interview. All right, welcome back, everybody, to another Sit Down with Skriv. Today, I am joined by Vu, of course. I'm really glad to have you on the show, mate.
Glad to be here in my home on camera.
Indeed.
Great.
Yeah, indeed. So usually how I open the shows, or how I get the guests to kind of open the interview, right, is to just, in your own words, give like a bit of a brief history of how you got into esports.
I got into esports, let's see, when I was like 7, my brother played Counter-Strike, so obviously I played Counter-Strike, and then I started gaming. And I'm a very competitive person, so I played CS pretty seriously, probably dropped like 20,000 hours in Source. Don't do that, don't do that. And then in like 2015, I saw there was a gap, because I'd played for a long time. I saw there was a gap in YouTube where nobody was making content in-game leadership or like just strat calling. So I made a series on strat calling. Then I followed that up with like one other video. I was like, I'm gonna make this other video and see how it does, and it did really well. It got like 10,000 views or something, which at the time was amazing, right? So I kept going, and then at some point I was watching some casters, and I was like, these guys are shit. Like, I like no offense to Nothing, but I think it was when Nothing was casting and they were putting him on broadcast as like a caster, and he could do analyst stuff, but I don't think he's much of a caster. And I was like, dude, I could do this so much better. So I just started casting, and then it kind of went whatever direction it went in.
Yeah, I suppose so. Obviously, more recently breaking into the DreamHacks, right? And on a few of their broadcasts, which I'm sure any CS commentator would tell you is a very good like step up in your career kind of thing to be on a DreamHack broadcast. I wanted to ask, getting more specifically into the content creation side. I suppose you've alluded a little bit to making stuff surrounding that strat calling, IGLing kind of thing, but maybe more so these days now that it has grown and it is a solid focus of yours. What is something that you tend to focus on? Because I would say like having a quick look across and things like that, there's a lot of interesting kind of ideas. You put a tweet out recently about the helping a silver kind of idea, right, and whatnot. So what are some of the things like that you tend to take an interest in when you create content?
So a lot of it is a balance between there's a few things. First of all, trying to make stuff that is engaging to as many people as possible. So it can't be too specific. Something like I've made videos in the past that are something like, a title along the lines of angle isolation, like that would be a title, and it's just like it's just not going to get a lot of views. And the thing is, okay, people shit on clickbait. However, if a video is good, if the video itself is good, the viewer are only benefited by clickbait, because you are more likely to then have seen that video if the content is good and I clickbaited it, right? So it's got to have like an engrossing title. I've got to find a way to make it I guess like available for a newer player. So I like to have content that's like the more complex side of CS is the stuff that's a little bit more interesting to me. But I want to make stuff that's like got that complex side, but also has the ability for someone with like very little game knowledge to at least comprehend the concept and potentially try and employ it at some point. So it's a bit of a complicated like scenario trying to find topics that I haven't gone over yet, which is like honestly most of the things I think about are already in a video, and also is like not too simple but can be engaged by multiple levels of player. And I'm thinking, since I'm like trying to hire an editor at this point, I'm thinking of doing some topics like adopting a silver. I've got one where a viewer of mine has a team in LEM, and I did a coaching session for them, so I'm thinking about making that into a series. So some things that are like have some more complex basis, but also are very engaging for like a newer player to kind of understand how things work. That's where I'm kind of at this point.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time I come round to the conversation on here like about content creation. Had Pronogo on for the first episode, right, and a few other casting types and whatnot. And I think certainly it resonates that you need to find something that obviously you're interested in, that you can also do to a high quality, and then still have a reach, so to speak. I guess like an interesting kind of question, maybe you haven't decided or whatever, but would you still call yourself a content creator, or was the moving into analysis, moving into obviously doing some casting to a pretty high level in the past as well, do you see yourself as one, or is it more of like an amalgamation kind of thing?
So the problem is, my problem has been that I have like not 7 things. Literally, I've got 5 things, I guess, that I can kind of arguably do to a fairly high level, right? So I'm obviously have coached several MDL teams. I can do that. I have the content creation on YouTube. I have a stream on Twitch that gets a good number of views. I've done analysis stuff, and I've done casting stuff. So the problem, it's literally a problem of what do I define myself as? What am I focused most on? And to do that, I have to decide which one I think is the best gamble. And currently, I'm more focused on the content creation side, because that seems to be the best gamble in terms of like doing this full time, making a good living out of it, right? If it was possible, I would probably lean towards analysis. I think analysis is probably something if I could choose, I might be more interested in. However, I kind of like fell headfirst into this one. Freya made a tweet looking for an analyst for DreamHack November, and I didn't even see it. Tea Time sent it to me in a Twitter DM, and I responded to it, so they picked me up. And then I guess they couldn't find an analyst for the first few days of this last event, so they got me again, right? So I guess I'm good enough that I've not made it on their list of people they can hire if they need someone, right? Which is, I guess, what you want. But casting kind of went to the wayside a little bit because I ran into a couple of roadblocks that I think I've discussed before, but I don't really want to go too in depth about. But I ran into a couple of roadblocks, and when you've got the ability to coach, plus make YouTube videos and all this other stuff, it's like pretty easy not to overcome those roadblocks, which is what I think most successful casters or analysts have gone through, some roadblock that they've just like powered through. And for me, it's just a little bit too easy for me to just kind of like duck, dodge, and leave all these roadblocks by just moving to a different avenue, you know?
Yeah, no, I get you. Big man tea time, of course, you know, real homie. But yeah, certainly, I think I can see where you're coming from, and it's something that, you know, the likes of Thorin, perhaps, right, with his kind of content creation side, and by the numbers, I would imagine is a fairly good thing for him. It's like sometimes you have to justify if it's worth all your effort, or if you could, you know, send it somewhere else. And yeah, I think the roadblocks are, like you say, kind of inevitable, but I suppose getting through them sometimes can be a bit more of like a choice, you know, if you decide that you don't need to do that because you have something else available. And I guess it does happen. You see a lot of the younger people maybe getting involved in esports and things like that will move away for education or work or whatever it is, because to them it's just not quite feasible. I guess that's some of the difficulties of working in a bit of a crazy industry from time to time, I suppose. Moving on. I think you talk about, you know, your content creation and the analysis side of things and whatnot, and then coaching as well. Do you think that like your experience from creating videos and from being in that coaching position has helped you when it comes to working on the analyst desk?
Yes and no. The thing is, when it comes to an analyst desk, most people are gonna or I would imagine most people are gonna underrate how difficult it is, because you come to the outset of a game that you've been watching, and sometimes you have very little to talk about and you have to make it work, which can be a challenge. Other times you have a million things you want to talk about and you want to get like a good conversation going, and there can be some back and forth. But analyst desk segments are really short, so you have to be good. You have to do it to understand that it's like it's kind of an art form to get out the things you're trying to get out in the very short amount of time you have allotted to get it out. And I'm absolutely not good enough at that yet. Hopefully get there eventually. But, you know, most analyst desk segments, I leave stuff on the table, stuff I'd like to say that I just don't get out. And that can sometimes leave kind of an unfinished, like I think viewers can sometimes feel that it's like the entire narrative wasn't talked about. And then sometimes that leads to people feeling like, you know, you missed something, but well, did you miss it? You were just trying to get it out as quickly as possible. You might not have gone into the nuance of things, which is something that I am like infamous for, is going into like the unbelievably ridiculous nuance of like the smallest, dumbest play. So like I either, you know, delve into that or I miss it entirely. You know, it's not easy. I forget what the question was exactly. Hopefully that answered it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think definitely right. Like being succinct, I think both on and off the desk in a sense, right? So being an analyst and a caster, maybe if you know you are more analytical as a color commentator, yeah, it's something that I struggle with for sure. Like being succinct, I tend to focus more on play-by-play anyway, but perhaps part of that is because when it comes to making a point, I can talk around it from time to time. And it's something I'm trying to consciously do now as well, while I'm getting ready for my next question, kind of thing. But yeah, I feel that there's a lot of difficulty when it comes to, you know, not being in control, as it were, you know, with like timeframes and things like that, which again is maybe something moving into content that you do have essentially full control of, like what you put in the video. There's maybe some things that you might have to miss out or whatever because of logistics, or you can't find the info or whatever, but for the most part the general gist and message and the actual content, you know, is completely under your control, I think. Is that something that maybe like has drawn you a bit more to the content is the fact that you have that kind of control over what goes in it?
So I've got a second channel where I go into like very specific details like that. It's definitely something that's kind of attractive to go into stuff where, I went into the difference between Bubsky and Zipnix on Nuke, and why they replaced Zipnix with Bubsky on Nuke. And I really like having like the full story. So for that, I went through like a ton of demos with Esatag, a ton of demos with Zipnix and Bubsky, looked at the stats, looked at how they were using their utility, when they were using their utility, what angles they were playing. Like, and sometimes that can kind of be my downfall. I'm a little bit too perfect in that, like, if I'm not sure I'm right about something, I typically don't put it out there, which means I'll leave opinions on the table. For example, I mentioned this to you before, like, I kind of felt like Astralis was looking a little bit weak in their last event, and then they come into this event and they shit the bed, and I'm like, but I saw this coming, but nobody cares if you saw it coming if you didn't say you saw it coming, right? Because I just wanted to do more research on it, but didn't have the time to do the research on it, so then we end up in this spot. And that happens a lot as well. Or what happens is that as a YouTuber, I am very much acquainted with the idea of getting views. So when I do, a week of research on something, and then I look back at it and I go, wow, this is no longer relevant in any way. So I've basically just done a week of research to get nothing. And unfortunately, the reality is that going too in depth of the specific nuance on things doesn't get very many views. It actually turns people off. To some extent, the thing that makes a video watchable and the thing that makes people tune in a lot is more like the flow. I think I've said this to people before. I think the flow of a video is like 90% of its appeal. If you can keep it flowing well, and I think that's something like Elma Putty did really, really well in his videos. The flow was always on point. He didn't get usually too hung up on little tiny details. There's a couple of videos of mine that overlap with the exact same video he did on the same topic. And most of the opinions are generally agreeing. You're usually going to find that if you have two people that know the game well. Most of the opinions will usually agree. But, there'll be little tiny things I'll go into. And he'll focus more on the macro perspective and the storyline. And when he does delve into the little things, he manages to bring it along with the storyline. So it's always moving kind of a narrative of what's going on forward. Whereas I was a lot more choppy with that. So that's something I've worked on a lot recently, which means the videos are a little bit less of just like whatever I want the video to be, and much more of like, well, here's a topic I want to talk about, and let's try and make this as attractive as possible. And I've actually found that some of the videos that I've made that intuitively to me have seemed like bad videos, or not bad videos, but they're lacking explanations for certain things, are videos that I actually in hindsight see as my best videos, because people are always going to be confused by certain things. There's always going to be something that gets missed, and stopping and basically chopping the whole video off to explain something that's like most people should get anyways is actually like actively hurting your content,
Yeah. I think I'm kind of in a weird bit with it, not to just fully pivot into me and what like I'm doing, but I think I can kind of see that, that analytical content, people eat it up, right? In a sense, so long as, like you're saying, you can kind of find that Elmer Putty, maybe like a Hawker-esque kind of flow, and make it work. But even just by kind of title alone, in a sense, I made like a power rankings video for the EU ESEA stuff, put it on Reddit, and within like 24 hours, it's my most viewed video, right? And I would say that in terms of, the editing and I made a few basic notes that I would have had anyway going into the season, and just kind of recorded me talking over a tier list maker. You know what I mean? I would say that I put a little bit more time and effort like into the interviews with, even if it just comes to like the post stuff, right, with editing and all that, and yet doesn't seem to hit the mark as hard. Not that at this stage for me that's kind of what it's all about, but still, it certainly resonates that sometimes, you know, it confuses you how the success of a video works and whatnot.
So, you know? I've got an opinion on that, kind of, in that, like, for example, this is what I think of editing. So the video you put out today is not going to benefit even a little bit by having like really nice editing. Maybe it'll increase the watch time by a tiny bit, and that'll increase the views, but it's like minuscule. It's like a fraction of what it'll do. However, what it actually does is if you edit a video really well, people are more likely to subscribe, and they're more likely to be excited for your following content. So they're much more likely to click into your videos in the future. So if you have a nice idea and a really good thumbnail and a really good title, people are going to click on that. And it'll give you a chance to win them over on your channel. But it's like the flow, the pacing, you know, all of that going into the video itself that determines if the next time you make the same video, people are excited and they're like, oh yeah, I love that last, you know, power ranking video we made. Let's watch this next one. Or if they're like, the last one was fine. Like maybe they even watched the whole thing, but they're not like excited for it. And I think that's something Elma Putty really captured, which was like everyone was excited for the next Elma Putty video. They want to see his take on it. They want to see how he goes through it because he made it so watchable and enjoyable. I've said this before. I'm not convinced that Elma Putty really showed that much like game knowledge in his videos. Not that he like didn't show occasional flashes of it. You could definitely see it from time to time in certain videos. But I think his videos did well mostly because they were very watchable. And he also knew the game. So when that came into it, nobody was like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? But I don't think what made those famous was the information as much as it was like just the way he did it, his style, all of that thing, you know?
Yeah, I think as someone, honestly, like, I feel it does make a lot of sense, for sure. Because you can watch those videos and there's nothing, I guess, groundbreaking in terms of, like, the analysis and whatnot. But, again, it's like trying to make content palatable, I suppose, is quite important. Do people want the super in-depth stuff, or are most of the people watching this analysis content, like, I guess, lower ranked? Probably in the not necessarily an MM per se, but I think it's really hard, isn't it, to like find that healthy balance and the nail on the head kind of thing, you know, every single time, and every now and then a title will just kind of do the work for you, I suppose, at least in terms of the clicks, which I guess is getting back to that kind of clickbait energy that you were talking about a little bit earlier. One that always, you know, sticks with me is like when I saw Hawker's art video just like explode, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering, maybe not verbatim, but like the title is the most aggressive player in CSGO or whatever, and that clearly captured people just based off of the very idea of the video, the very concept of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's gonna get a lot of views for that. I feel like I've watched the video. He had that whole chart of like the aggressiveness, right? That's a really good way to get people looped in. There's a couple of channels that I watch that do a lot of those types of things. It's a good way. I think the optimal way, like in theory, to do a channel is to make it really accessible for newer players, but then basically give nods to the more experienced players by having, you know, certain moments where you go really in depth in something and kind of show not only that, like, you know, you're worth watching for a more experienced player, but also it helps like kind of less experienced players get the idea of like, well, this guy really knows what he's talking about when he's going into this type of thing. But really most people don't know the game that well. Like, it depends what your definition is though, right? Like when I'm thinking of a good player, I'm like, I've got my like, I've played this game for 20 years vibe going when I'm like, yeah, if you're not in advanced, you're probably not good at CS. And other people are like, that's pretty unreasonable, you know? Like, I feel like if I'm face at 10, I'm probably pretty good. And I'm like, probably not, you know? So it's like, it's really kind of in the eyes of the beholder what a good player is.
Yeah, I suppose so. Like, you know, you face it level 10. Although I have never really been close. I've not spent a lot of time on like the third party stuff, but I feel it's more like you probably know how to play like Pugs well, which is
that's exactly
a very different beast, you know.
It's
for sure.
It's totally entirely different. Like people that are face at 10 that have never played in leagues, they're really bad. Like just fundamentally, they just don't play the game very well. And then even like the MDL team I coached this season was just like any map that they had gone over without me, I felt like there was like major issues in terms of the way they were playing it specifically, which is like, you know, that's an MDL team, but they're still not strategically quite there, you know?
Yeah. So I wanted to move forwards a little bit more onto the desk work that you've done, right? And very quickly, very curiously, it doesn't necessarily have to be esports, but who are some of the people that you have looked to for like a little bit of inspiration, or people that you've kind of admired their analysis work in the past?
Honestly, when it comes to analysis stuff, I'm kind of more in my own shoes. Like I'm not really looking too much to other people. When it comes to casting, I've done a ton of work on casting. Analysis stuff, it's more like I really just fell like head first into it, and I'm trying my best to be me. I've realized that the reality is people want a fresh take. They want a fresh perspective. They don't want the same thing recycled. And you can definitely pick up some certain things from different analysts. But when it comes to analyst stuff, I feel like that's much more of an area where I can kind of just pave my own ground and kind of do things my own way. I might be missing something by not like learning from others. I've definitely watched tons of analyst desks. The analyst desks I remember loving the most were obviously with Thorin, because he's, manages to make it pretty funny a lot of the time, and he's like pretty critical, which I think is really necessary in a world where most analysts now, I feel like a lot of them are afraid of making someone upset or getting someone mad at them. And that's something you do have to be worried about, because unless you've got like that pedigree of having been a pro in the past, if a pro gets mad at you, everyone's going to be on their side, even if they are in the wrong. That's kind of the way it works. But yeah, I've mostly been trying to manage my own way when it comes to analyst stuff. When it comes to casting, I'll just throw that out there. I love Sadokist, and actually I love Scrawny. I think Scrawny is really, really good.
Yeah, I can agree. I think Sado's kind of in that position where, at the very least in the conversation, right, for a lot of people when they talk about the best commentator in CS.
I meant to say Moses. Okay. As well. Well, Sadokist obviously, but Moses I think is like the most slept on caster. People know he's great, but like if you watch Moses, where he's got like, he goes between, this is something that most newer casters I feel like really struggle with. He goes between narrative and play-by-play, like when he's in certain scenarios, extremely well. The switch between like, Stewie's had a really rough tournament, he's got to go, like that type of narrative content, into like when in a clutch, you want to be switching back between narrative and play-by-play sometimes, and analysis in a clutch. Moses does that, I think, better than anyone else. That's something I really picked up from him that I didn't pick up from anyone else early on.
Yeah, I think that's fair, right? I think as well, for me, it's kind of like the level of improvement from when he moved off of the desk and had some pretty big shoes to fill in the form of Semler, right? I think he'd done like a little bit prior, but to go solid in on that, legendary in its own right duo to then form another, I think for me is massively noteworthy for sure. But on the point of Scrawny, I like kind of completely agree. I think he's on his way to also being within that conversation.
He's really unique. I think.
Finals
I don't know.
really
you can disagree with me.
No, I agree.
Anyone's free to disagree, but I think Scrawny does some things that almost nobody else does, And I think people get like sometimes you see Reddit threads that are kind of like annoyed because he does lean into it a lot. And I can see if people might not like that all the time. But I think like when it comes to learning, I guess this is something, you know, you could argue that is similar on the desk is like there are certain every top tier caster or analyst is going to do at least one thing really well. And if you can pick up on that and kind of, you know, adopt a little bit of that and take you know, do your take on that, you're probably going to help yourself improve.
I think we're at an interesting kind of time where there's not necessarily been enough of a timeline, like with commentators and whatnot, to kind of I guess you can draw inspiration, but it's not like you could say that this commentator at the top level, at the very least, it's kind of worked on their own style, actually has a lot of similarities to like a commentator from 60 or 70 years ago, right? That kind of, and is drawing parallels with them. I think there's a lot of originality at the moment, I suppose, is what people are trying to strive towards, like get those core fundamentals of whatever game it is that you're working on, and then trying to obviously form your own style, which I think is important, but then hammering that home in a sense, you know, and like you say, like Scrawny is quite unique, and I think it is what is separating those good commentators from the great commentators, is that we can say, you know, Scrawny has a really good style, but I'll not name any names, I'll not use myself or whatever, but, you know, a commentator working at kind of the mid-level is still fundamentally sound or has a few things that they do, but there's maybe not as much originality to what they're doing, like in the big moments or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think you're trying to find like there's always the balance between, you know, you want to have your own style. If you try and steal someone else's style, you're just gonna flop really hard. You want to have your own style, but then like some people just lean only into their own style, and then you've got commentators that are very niche. Trying to think of, yeah, I think a lot of the time that happens in like tier 2, tier 2.5, where you get, you know, commentators that are pretty niche because they have their style and it's their style. I'm thinking of someone like I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but JRT, if people know him, I think is kind of like that. He does a ton of research. He's got all the stats to back everything up. He's like, he's really got his own style. But I think, you know, in leaning into your own style too much, you kind of lose that mass appeal. And maybe not everyone's looking for the mass appeal. Maybe you know, some people are happy with what they're doing. But I think there's a balance to be had there.
Yeah. And always finding that, you know, I mean, we've talked about it in content, it's difficult. And I guess it also depends, like you're kind of alluding to, how much of, not necessarily like integrity, but sort of like your own interests, your own opinions do you want to perhaps put to one side, and yes, indeed, I might not like incorporating this into my casting style, but I kind of have to because it's what other people are doing. But I think it's certainly an interesting one that, you know, to be fair, with asking that question and with having you answer it about, you know, inspiration behind analysts and stuff like that, I think it is a much more individual kind of position. And often you see as well that the opinions on analysts can be much more polarizing, right? Like with Pimp, even still now, even though I would say he's fairly solidified, at least regardless of what he says, but at least in terms of the work that he's getting, right? So clearly he's doing something right, but there's still people out there that really do not like the way that he approaches the analyst desk.
Do you remember that one? Do you remember the thread called Vince Deserves Better? I don't know if you saw this thread on Reddit like a few years ago when he was casting with Pimp. That was like, I just wanted to, like, I call this out whenever I can, because that was like the epitome of Reddit in a thread was that it was just like, Vince deserves better. Pimp is dog shit. Vince is amazing. We love Vince. Fuck Pimp. Like, dude, come on. Like, that's just like, you're so unnecessarily harsh on Pimp at that time. And the funniest part about that was Vince the day before had made a tweet that was you don't have to shit on one person to big up another person, probably referring to like people kind of shitting on Pimp and bigging him up. And then this Reddit thread gets like 10,000 upvotes. Like,
Yeah.
Vince deserves better.
It is a bit mad. It seems to happen a lot
crazy.
as well. With the,
one
with
of
the
the
whole
things
bigging people up by shitting on other people.
Yeah. One of the things I've been looking at is, I guess like the style I guess I'm going for with analyst stuff is I like to know really well how teams play, especially in DreamHack November that I did, where I did all 4 or 5 days, and there was only 8 teams. I was able to look into every team. I have a notepad on every team, on every map, how they play, what's unique about their play style. And I feel like I did a really good job of being able to kind of give really good context on how these teams are going to match up stylistically. That's a really tough style to maintain because that's like a week of preparation. And so, you get a day rate, but they don't pay you for your prep days, right? Like they don't pay you for preparation. It was a lot harder with this DreamHack. They're calling it DreamHack 43, I think now.
Right.
I think they changed the numbers. Where there's 12 teams and I'm there for 2 days. So can I justify putting 2 weeks of preparation in for that? Made it a little bit harder. But I guess that's like if I was to go with the style, that would be it. And I actually want to shout out to someone who's definitely never in a million years going to watch this. But Doug Polk is he hired me to coach his advanced team. I don't know if you've ever heard of Doug Polk. I feel like I expect people to know him, but nobody knows him in the CS scene. He's a professional poker player. He's got a YouTube channel with like 400,000 subs. But he retired from poker to play CS. And he paid a couple of players to play on his team, and he hired me to full-time coach the team. And his perspective on CS, while I don't necessarily think is flawless, actually gives me a very different outlook on CS than almost anyone. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone else that has the same outlook as I have on the way CS should be played. Basically numbers-based, percentage-based stuff that I think also gives me a pretty unique outlook and style when it comes to analyst stuff, and to coaching stuff. And I think the most recent team I coached, I think I coached them a million times better than the first MDL team I coached with, that kind of knowledge on board.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, without getting into it too much, is there maybe like a brief summary you could give of the way that you feel CS should be approached?
Yeah, so the way Doug approaches it is that it should all be percentage based. So what you do is you go into practice on a day. Maybe you've got an off day and you get the team together and you ask the team a question. How often should you play 3B on Inferno? What do you think we should be doing there? Now, there's 2 ways. You can ask the team the question. What I was doing when I was with that team, I would go through, here's the top 5 teams on Inferno and the top 20 based on their win rate on CT side. Here's their percentages. Let's average out those percentages, and that's the percentage we're going to run, because that should generally give you it might not be perfect, but it's going to give you a pretty good idea, right? So, for example, I did this on Mirage, and if you averaged out Heroic, this is a few months back, but if you averaged out Heroic, Na'Vi, and Big, and Furia and Liquid on Mirage, the average out was like 20% of rounds they played 1-3-1, 20% they played 2-1-2, 20% they played 2-2-1, and 20% they played whatever the standard setups I didn't just name. And then 20% of the time they'd have a random setup like double underpass, or they'd double push Palace, they'd double push A, they'd play aggressive B apps, like all these different random setups. So that was like the number we came to. And then what you do is you randomize it based on spawns. So I have this whole like picture of all the spawns on Mirage, and there's 16 spawns I think on Mirage, and we did it based on our cat player. So when our cat player has these spawns, we're doing this. When our cat player has A spawns, we're playing A. When our cat player has for example, when our cat player has a mid smoke spawn, right, like the Astralis deep mid smoke on Mirage, he would throw it usually as a fake. So like, 75% of the time it would be a smoke to fake. But when our opper has that spawn, we're throwing it usually to take mid, because it makes more sense if your opper has that spawn, you throw the smoke to take it because you want him at the back, you want your rifler at the front, right? So it was basically fully randomized based on spawns, because spawns are random in CS, or as random as it can get, whatever.
Mhm.
Someone's going to correct me in the comments. As random as it can get. And then you have the percentages that you want to play, and you run it like that. Doug loves to run it on T side too. I'm a little bit more hesitant about that. I actually asked Maniac about this because I'm always interested in other people's opinions. And he goes, well, that's basically opposite to exactly what I know about exactly how I learned CS. Now, I think when you get to a top tier 1 level, I think teams like Astralis and Big might be running things like this because you're so close to optimized and teams aren't playing as reactive. Like, if someone on Nuke does a squeaky drop on you, you're supposed to know the response. You're supposed to know how to respond to that. And you're supposed to have a setup that deals with that fairly effectively. So you're not supposed to go into the next round and go, okay, guys, we're going one lower and he's going to cover the squeaky drop. That's ridiculous. But that is what you see in matchmaking, right? That is what you see in like low levels of leagues, right? So as you get to the top, I think the randomization is more and more relevant. However, on CT side, I think it's really good because it means that the percentages you want to run stuff and what is optimal in your mind. And then not only that, but by having those percentages, it's really easy to counter strat. If your opinion and our opinion at the time was 30% B on Inferno, or 30% of the time you play 3B on Inferno, and your opponents are running 60% 3B, it's really easy to go, well, they're running 3B too much. Here's how we can adjust our play. Here's how we can adjust our percentages. And you can have like a general idea of what your T-side percentages could be, and you adjust based on that. And it's really easy to counter strat in that regard. But most teams are like, well, we go 3B, however much we go 3B. And then your opponents do it way too much, and it's harder to realize what they're doing too much. And then you also have tendencies, for example, there's a spawn, an aggressive outer spawn on Nuke. I'm going way too in depth on this. I'm sorry. There's an aggressive outer spawn on Nuke, the front left spawn on Nuke, where you want your operator to take a spawn and go aggressive. He can go mini. He can go for the outer peak with the flash near T-Red, or he can go into a spot we call Dragon. It's like top secret. The device loves to play there. We call it device. I forgot. My last team called it Dragon. The top secret angle where you peek down T-Red, wait for someone to cross, right? You can do any of those three things. I just put up 4 fingers. You can't see it. Any of those 3 things. And people are going to have tendencies. So the opper on the last team I was coaching loved the T-Red peak. So he almost only went for the T-Red peak. But it's like, well, now you're predictable. You're doing that too often. So you've got to find a way to balance that. So like in poker, you would use a randomizer, a random number generator. In CS, I think the way I said we should do it is we should do like round numbers. So if you do something 50-50, you have sometimes 50-50. So like on our aggressive ramp spawn, it would be 50% of the time. When the op goes there, you play passive and 50% you play aggressive. I just said like do odds and evens. So one of them you do on odd rounds, one of them you do on even rounds, which is actually not perfectly balanced because you're more likely to buy on CT side Nuke. You're more likely to buy on round 4 because round 3, round 4. I can't do math. Whatever. Because you force buy second round, then you save, round 4. Right? So you're more likely to have a buy on round 4 than on round 3. But it's close enough. Fuck it. I mean, whatever.
It's interesting.
Style.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, in a sense, I mean, my knowledge of it is very, very limited. Comes from Moneyball, right? But I feel like it's worked in baseball kind of thing. Basing things more off of numbers to a certain extent, right? So it is definitely a, an interesting conversation.
It's not at all how I call. I'll admit. Like,
fair.
Sorry to cut you off, but when I call, like even when I called for that MDL team, there's times that the IGL isn't kind of getting things together, so I'll just like take over and call, and I call you call it exploitative, right? There's exploitative and there's GTO. It's poker. GTO game theory optimal. It's like no matter what your opponents do, it works, right? Which is very Doug. Like he's very whatever. Anyways. I call very exploitative. So we had a game on Nuke where it's like here's a round breakdown. Round 1, we're gonna drop Squeaky because NA teams suck at holding Squeaky drops. Like they're so bad at holding Squeaky drops. Round 1, we're gonna have a Squeaky drop. We're gonna have outer smokes off of that, and then we're gonna go outer to lower with 3 people in 1 lurk lobby. Round 2, we're gonna Squeaky drop. Outer smokes, and we're gonna do the same thing. Round 3, Squeaky drop. Or no, round 3, do something totally different. It was like outer smokes or whatever, just in case they counter it. Then round 4, Squeaky drop. Wait a couple seconds, instantly hit ramp. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get their ramp player to drop, because your ramp player always drops when you do a Squeaky drop. You can't have... Usually you want your mini player to drop, but he can't drop if you're down vents for obvious reasons. So you have your ramp player drop, and then your heaven player has to shift over to cover ramp. So what you try to do is you try and catch them in that rotation where their heaven player is moving into ramp, because you technically want him in ramp so he can also drop. Otherwise, you have one player holding lower alone if they hit ramp, right? So you try and catch them on that timing, right? And then next round, you blow door and you have your opper post on mini, and this mini player is going to be trying to deal so desperately with the squeaky drop that you get a free kill on the guy mini, right? So basically, you're constantly toying with their expectations and like catching them off when they're adjusting, and it's not supposed to work because you're not supposed to be hard adjusting, in my opinion, to things your opponents are doing, or you are very susceptible to this concept. I've had games on our CT side where we're winning, and I can like, it seems impressive, but I promise you it's not. Anyone at any decent level can do this, where it's just like, you can call what they're going to call next, or very likely to call next, because you see what they see, and you're winning, so you see exactly the opening they think they know, and you just close it, right? So there's this game where there's this round where we show they fake on Inferno. We have 1B. They push him off of car, right? So you're supposed to rotate a second player back to B. We don't rotate a second player back to B. They hit A. They see all 4 players there. So what are they going to do next gun round? They're going to do the same thing, but they're actually going to go B because they think we're weak on the like we're not over rotating, right? So they do exactly that. But you see it coming because you're not dumb and you see what they saw the round before. So when you have all these like over adjustments and you're trying to play exploitative, you're open to getting exploited yourself. And I think that's suboptimal, but it is the way the game works. That's actually just how people play. Obviously up until high MDL level, because I'm saying, these are both MDL games I'm talking about.
I mean, honestly, mate, this is like, part of the reason why I want to do these interviews is to get into things like this, where you get to flex your muscles, so to speak, and get into passions and whatnot. And it's quite clear that you have like a deeper knowledge and an interesting approach. And I think there's a cool conversation to, continue to be had around that, numbers game kind of approach to things, and how far
something
does it go,
I try and ask any good analyst, any very knowledgeable person. I try and ask them what they think about that, because it's unique. I bought into it. It's not my idea, obviously. Again, I credit Doug Polk for kind of bringing that, but it is something like I was kind of on that run. Like I was kind of, I think when you think about CS at a higher and higher level, you move in that direction, you start to understand that. But then Doug comes in and he's a poker player, which is all percentages and all this other bullshit. And of course he's got a poker player's idea, and so like I really bought into a lot of what he kind of sold me, and that kind of changed the way I'm thinking, which is why I coached that team, other than the money, because it was good money. But actually, like for me, it was really about growth. It was like I saw Doug as like a guy that had an interesting take on CS, and I don't know, maybe this is me being a huge CS nerd. I guess it is. It's like if I see someone that does something different, I want to learn about it. I want to find out. I want to improve. And so when he was talking to me about CS, like even before money was a topic, obviously I didn't tell this to him. I tried to negotiate the best I could, but I was like, I want to fucking work with this guy. Like I want to learn what this guy thinks, how he operates. And, I think I've learned a lot from that.
Yeah, I think it's the beauty that we have, in CS at the moment that I feel the game is not rapidly changing, I suppose, in the way that some other titles, even Valorant, right, but like also looking towards, I guess, like Rainbow Six and League and things like that, they tend to make quite drastic changes, as it were, whereas I think Valve are more in the mindset, correct me if I'm wrong and you have a different opinion, but I feel they're more in the mindset of keeping things as similar as possible, but then I don't know, I guess when they change like the Krieg and whatnot and the economy, to be fair, now I'm thinking about it deeply, but I think they like to extend metas, let's say. They like to, rather than make quick changes, right? Sometimes small, sometimes big. It all depends.
They're all in the numbers. Yeah.
Right. They're thinking more so about, let's see how the game looks like this, and leave it there for a while, let it develop, in the same space, and then maybe even they have a bit of an idea behind them. Because I think it's really curious that, with the Krieg meta, could have kind of been there, but people were so focused on the org that they kind of overlooked the Krieg changes around the same sort of time until the org got taken out of prominence. But even then, we're seeing it back in
it took a while.
Different situations now as well, like Astralis. I seem to note watching them on certain maps, like they'll pick up 4. They'll have everybody on an org, So I think there's a lot in this game that has been around for a while and that does maybe to someone like me, let's say I don't watch things, but I play like a DMG kind of level with my mates, right? I'm not really all that concerned getting super, super good at CS. I just sort of play it for fun, right? I would look at the game as being relatively unchanging, but I think it even applies to a top level as well, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so first of all, this is just I've been swearing a bunch. I'm assuming swearing's allowed because
I would have told you otherwise.
Yeah. Swearing is my thing. So why would Valve ever want to change things when I hate it because it's like everyone goes, it's too stagnant, we need changes, change the map pool, and then something changes. Not like that. Like don't do that. It's like CS is literally been so like spoiled, or I don't know if spoiled is the right word, but so conditioned that they always have things the way it's always been, that any change that comes in, everyone hates. So there's no incentive for Valve to change anything. And like people don't seem to realize that why would a developer, a person trying to improve the game, why would they feel good about making a change when they just get immediately shit on for the change? There's also the aspect that this is like attributing something to Valve that they haven't said publicly, but it seems to me to be obvious. It seems like Valve has kind of an I'm smarter than you mentality, where it's like, here's the numbers, we're going based off the numbers, and we don't care what you think because the numbers are right. So for example, you could see the Krieg nerf coming, and I was shouting this from the fucking rooftops to nobody apparently. It was like everyone was going, the Krieg's gonna get nerfed, it's gonna get nerfed. You look at the data, 30% of kills done with the AK, like in an event, 20% done with the SG. It's not going to get nerfed until it's more than the AK. That's how they're going to operate. Like it's, I felt like that was pretty clear. It's not OP when the AK still has a 2-to-1 kill ratio compared to the SG, even though it's blatantly busted, right? Like even though everyone can see it, until they see it in the data, they're not going to change it. And Valve is also, I think, a company where they do more long-term data. So it's like, if you have 2 events where the SG gets more kills than the AK, then they're going to look at nerfing it. But then I also feel like the devs are also just kind of like, have the same mentality where it's like, look, we're smarter than you. So basically what they did was they tried a small nerf, and then they're like, we're going to try a small. It's just like how I used to be in school, where it's like at some point I'd be like, I'm going to study really hard, I'm going to show up every day, I'm going to in high school I'm going to get good grades this semester. So we're going to start with a small change and make sure we're doing 30 minutes of studying daily. So we're going to start with a very small nerf. And then like 2 weeks, like 2 months later, everyone's still complaining. And like, if the analogy continues, it's like I'm back to never showing up and not doing my homework and not studying. And it's just like, oh, I got a test coming. Let's just cram for 2 days.
Yeah.
Valve's just like, well, you guys are still complaining. Fuck you, nuke it. Like, that's what basically Valve did. It was like, it's like, we're smarter than you. We're going to change it how we want. You're annoying us. We're going to do what you want, just to a ridiculous degree. Like, that's basically feels like most of the changes they made. Like, the iBuy Power stuff felt like, why are you annoying us with this shit? Fuck you, nuke it. Right? Like, the coaching stuff, why are we annoyed with this shit? Fuck you, nuke it. Like, that just seems like what they're doing. Like, they're doing their own thing until you annoy them so much that they just say, look, if you're going to annoy us like this, you're going to regret it. Here you go.
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult one. I think it is just kind of their philosophy, yeah, and I can kind of agree. Actually, no, I fully agree that, you know, they do come from a position of being smarter than you, right? And in a way, I don't think it's a bad approach. They have a lot of experience with this kind of thing, obviously. Regardless of kind of the esports attention on CS, I think with the game itself, they have, in my opinion, I think it creates for a much more interesting kind of experience where, you know, players do have to, at the very highest level, I guess, have to shift and work around and kind of min-max almost the current iteration of the meta. You know, whether it be like the UMP even, or the CZ or whatever, right? Or the Tech 9, depending on how far you want to go back. And I think it's starting to get to a decent spot, right? I don't know, I guess the Krieg was kind of ridiculous, but I feel since then we've been in an okay kind of area. But there's always going to be something, like at the moment it feels the Deagle's a little bit ridiculous. It also feels maybe the AWP needs a bit more work because of how crazy some of these AWPers are and some of the plays that they're able to pull off now that they've gotten more and more and more comfortable with this iteration of the weapon, and they've discovered that, you know, I don't know, staying scoped in is super, you know, you take your shot and you don't unscope, right? That's super effective. Or it's actually not all that difficult to use up close if you have to no-scope someone or whatever it may be.
I think players are actually just amazing now. I think that's actually what it is.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I mean, that does come into play, for sure.
I think I think like you have Simple and Zywoo. It's like the AWP has always been really good if you can always land your shot, right? But it's like, how many people can always land their shot? Kenny S 2015, Simple, Zywoo, Device. Well, fuck, that's 3 players in 3 top teams that never miss, right? And if you never miss, you can do ridiculous aggressive plays because it's a one-shot kill, you know?
Yeah, I suppose, to be fair, I think obviously the split between the high end and the average player, quote unquote, certainly makes a difference. But I think the wider point that I'm trying to make is just that with CS in this kind of position of longer, more extended kind of metas, perhaps your idea of, you know, the heavier focus on the numbers game could be something that comes into play over that broader kind of scale, because you don't have as drastic the changes, or something that, you know, whether it be like an item in a MOBA or a class of items or a class of champions, you know, like tanks suddenly becoming very effective again, could throw the whole idea out the window, right? Whereas I think in CS, you're not, because like positioning and everything is so important, and the placement of men, as it were, the placement of manpower on the server is so important. I feel even weapon changes, you know, if you have a core fundamental idea, the weapon changes are not going to affect that as much.
So there's a couple of issues. Like, the first issue is that, like, CS players are just really stubborn. So when you make a weapon change, it has to be completely busted for it to get picked up as like something that matters. And then you have like this situation. I remember this one. I think this happened. I might be misattributing this as something that happened a lot in League of Legends, because I know for sure this happens a lot in League of Legends, where they buff a champion everyone goes, oh, hey, let's try it out. And then they nerf it right back to where it was before they buffed it. And people still use it. And then they have to nerf it again. So it was like, oh, so it was busted before. And people just didn't know. I think they did this with the CZ where they like slightly buffed it. And then everyone just like was like, wow, this is totally busted. And then they re-nerfed it. Or like they did it with like some gun, I think. I don't remember. But it's like a common thing that like CS players are going to be like that. They're not going to try something until, and you can see that as evidenced by the SG and the AUG. But also look how long it took after the UMP was nerfed that people didn't just realize the MP9 is busted. Like I feel like I was like screaming into a fucking vacuum, like, hey guys, this gun is totally broken. Like it's so clearly the strongest SMG, and people are buying MP5s, they're buying MP7s, they're buying UMPs, and I'm like, you're wasting your fucking money. Buy an MP9. Now everyone's on that train, but it took forever. And even when the SG was totally busted and people knew it, you still took, what, a year for people to really like fully abuse it and have 5 people buying it. I don't know. Did you ever look into like what happened with Broodwar? I thought that was kind of interesting.
I don't have much knowledge there, no.
Yeah, so. Okay, because Thorin talks about this occasionally with the meta development in Broodwar. Broodwar is a game that I wasn't around watching Broodwar, so this could be somewhat misinformation, but I know the general concept is true. There was no or almost no patches, like basically none. And you had eras where like things completely changed. You had one race was looked at as completely unwinnable. Then I wish I could remember his name. There's some Protoss that revolutionized the matchups and won a couple of championships as Protoss and made Protoss viable. Even though there was no changes, no patch change, it was just like a change in the way they looked at the game, the way the game was played, build order changes, all this stuff that made it viable, which is always a really interesting thing to look at because it's a game that had no or very few patches and things still changed. And I think you see that with, for example, Inferno. Inferno is going through, in my opinion, a bit of a meta change. You're seeing the top teams play it a decent amount differently, and the map's been around forever. The map's been around forever, but the problem is it's stale for lower level players. Basically, it's stale for people that play the game casually. And when that happens, you lose players. And when that happens, like it's a snowball, right? And so you look at games that are really big now, they always cater perfectly to noobs, which is good and bad, good and bad.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose it's hard, right? Because like the extreme version of that for me, from what I've seen vaguely and from playing it kind of thing, a little bit is Fortnite, right? They changed their game drastically a lot, and they, I think, have made it relatively clear that like esports is theirs, and it's a marketing tool more than anything. Again, I don't want to, start misquoting and going too deep into it, but I know recently, shout out to my man Jake Lucky, you know him, watching some of his stuff. They've been a bit dodgy with like prize pools not really being that big, and but they changed their game a lot, right? And even before tournaments, don't really give too much of a fuck about that. We've obviously had a little bit of that in CS and whatnot before majors and whatnot. But yeah, I think the change is good, but it needs to come, I think, in the right way. And like you say, again, the maps are, I remember even within my casting, like noting and talking about things that North were doing on Inferno a long time ago. I feel like the first time that I saw some solid set executes was from them, kind of the leadership of MSL. But this is like 2 and a bit years ago, easily, if not more than that, right? And the way that it shifted away from like a simple A execute that people hadn't really seen, didn't know how to approach because it was so fresh and new, now into the way that, the map has come. I don't know, you may well have a closer ear on this. I feel like Nuke is going through a little bit.
Into it, yeah. I've looked a lot into Inferno meta changes.
Yeah, sure.
But you can finish what you're saying.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, Nuke has shifted a little bit in terms of, again, I guess because teams have gotten so used to it and so comfortable with it away from that CT side that we've seen for quite some time. I want to say, again, there were some set executes you could use on the T side that would maybe catch teams off very, very early on. But now it is going through a little bit more of a, I don't want to say it's fully even, but it's kind of getting there for me, at least with the games that like I watch and the games that I commentate on, which I guess I have a bit more of a attentive kind of focus on, right? Where maybe if I have Astralis playing or whatever on the second monitor, it's not quite as dialed in, right? You know what I mean?
I've actually kind of got a controversial opinion when it comes to Nuke, in that I don't think original Nuke was as CT-sided as people made it out to be.
Okay.
I remember specifically NIP back in the day, they had a couple of T-sides where they were picking up 10, 11 rounds on T-side, and you could see they put in massive work into that map, and no other team was doing it. All the other teams were like, we hate Nuke, it's so CT-sided, we're not going to put effort into it. And I think that teams just weren't playing it. And I think a lot of what's happening now is Nuke is kind of like getting figured out meta-wise. People are really understanding exactly how the rotations work, how to abuse those rotations, what hits work, all these sorts of things that's pushing the map to more balance. So I think that's a perfect example of like meta developing, changing a map more so than anything else. Because it's definitely not balanced, but I think, more of like a 9-6 scoreline is really what you think of as a normal scoreline. And that's about as balanced as you can get. I mean, 9-6, in my opinion, 9-6 is the perfect balanced map. Because if you get outside of that, then you get problems when maps become T-sided, and people don't realize this. Well, fans don't realize this. Like, I think any analyst probably realizes this. T-sided maps, in my opinion, are bad for the game because it's too easy for T-sides to snowball. Whereas for a CT side, if you get winning, a T side always has a way back in. And the way I describe this is anyone that played competitively when we had Cobble, you know how oppressive it was when you opened up, when it was super T-sided, because there was a Cobble iteration when it was super CT-sided. But when it was super T-sided, everyone knows how oppressive it was when you got down and you were 5-0 down on CT side to start the game. You may as well have left. Like, you may as well have just surrendered. It was over, right? Like, it's never that way in the other direction. When the CT side's up 5-0, you're not feeling good, right? But it's like, well, we can still come back into this game. We can get 6 rounds. It's not a big deal. Get some bomb plants, hurt their economy. There's a route back into it, especially because it feels better to lose when you have the initiative and you can decide where to hit, when to hit. And when you're on CT side and you're getting rolled over, it feels so oppressive because it's like, what do we do? Do we gamble stack this round? Maybe they go to the other site. Like, it just feels really bad.
Would you say a thought that sort of like pops into mind with the Nuke thing, and we've touched on like stubbornness of players and things like that. Do you think some of it comes down to the fact that like Vertigo comes into the pool, maybe, and then you have to change your permaban, right?
I think I think you got it right on the head. I think it might not be that way currently. Like, I don't think that's necessarily currently the way it's going. But when Vertigo first came in, I think that was a huge shift over to Nuke. I think that was a big shift to playing Nuke a lot. And that makes a big difference in the way everything plays out. And then I think you're also seeing like people get annoyed once you have full circle in a meta development. And I think you're seeing that on Overpass. Where it's like you can look at the meta now and then look back when Overpass was like kind of introduced. They're overlapping because like each meta counters the meta before it until you go into a full circle, and you're going to keep going in circle, and people get bored with that. And that's what's happening with Mirage specifically. People are bored about Mirage because it's like, the counter to everything. It's just a matter of like getting the right play at the right time in the right moment, and I think we're almost getting there with Inferno potentially. Nuke, not so much.
All right, look, we're breaking the hour mark here. I think we could really keep going in this and all the different kind of opinions and whatnot that you've got. And, I think certainly people that haven't already got to check out your content, got to check out some of the stuff that the Elo Heaven stuff that I watch that quite a lot, quite often, to be fair.
The
even while it's
podcast
live.
or the
yeah.
yeah.
And I think it's interesting to hear you know, unfiltered as it, not necessarily like unfiltered, but you know, free to time essentially, you know. And
so that's the podcast where we, that's kind of like, I went to Pronogo and I said, you know, I'm interested in doing some content. I think most people do podcasts kind of poorly. Let's try and make a podcast that's more like By the Numbers. I think By the Numbers is a great example. And that's, so it's like more free flowing. We try and get like lots of back and forth, crosstalk, all that. I feel like I'm really big on flow. Like flow is my thing. I think flow is like really important. It's what gets viewers entertained. So I want anything I'm doing, I try and focus on the flow, you know, other than interviews and most of my stuff. You know, listen, man, I don't do it perfect, all right, but I try.
Yeah. No, I get you. It's all good. And I mean, I'm feeling good about this one. I think we've had a really kind of interesting conversation and drawing a lot out of you in terms of, like I say, some of those opinions and approaches and a little bit of how you got started. But this is certainly what I wanted to really do with these interviews is delve deep. And sometimes that can be a little bit difficult with some people. They like to keep, you know, their answers cut and dry, let's say, right? So but
I definitely talk too much, if anything. You can never say I don't talk enough.
It's all good. Like I say, some really interesting ideas. I don't know, again, that whole approach of numbers, I think, is intriguing, like, to say the least, because it's an area of, like I've said, conventional sports that I find quite interesting. Is there a way to beat the game, kind of thing, if that makes sense, in the way that, you know, blackjack is a game that you can win, like, even though it's supposed to be stacked against you and they continually try to bring in things to deter you and whatnot, you can feasibly, might have to be really, really smart to win every single time, but there is a way to, you know, beat that game, so to speak.
Yep. I don't know. I don't know if we're there yet, but we'll get there eventually. If we're gonna be signing off the podcast, I gotta appreciate that. I think you did a really good. I think you're a good interviewer, man. Because I don't think I've done a couple of other interviews and it hasn't flowed quite as well, where I've gotten into a groove of something I'm talking about that's actually like obviously something I'm very interested in. So obviously that's a shout to the interviewer. If I want to shout out my socials, CSGO everywhere, you know. That's all we got.
All right. Well, there you go. Once again, thanks very much for coming on, Vu. I really appreciate it, buddy. And there you have it. Hey? Oh, man. What an interview. I don't mean objective. I mean, it was just a lot of fun from my perspective to have Vu on and to get him to open up about that passion within a passion, you know? A lot of people on this channel, for example, will be passionate about Counter-Strike. Vu certainly is. I certainly am, right? What is it within that you're then passionate about? You know, that difference of approach, that I guess opening the line of question, can CS be beaten? I think it's so intriguing, and that's, like I mentioned during the interview itself, big part of the reason why I kicked this off is because I wanted to indeed learn about people, but learn about what makes them tick, what they kind of want to focus on moving forwards, you know? And I think Vu, the other guests that I've had on, we've had some really cool conversations, some about current affairs, some about problems that they have, some about difficulties that they've overcome. But I think Vu is certainly the first one that has gone off, so to speak, about something that he is passionate about, for sure. And I just can't thank him enough. I think that it comes at a perfect time. I've worked on myself and worked on, you know, my interviewing technique. And then he has a really, really good mindset, a really, really good look into that world of Counter-Strike and that slightly different, that crossover of poker and Counter-Strike. It's so cool. And I had a lot of fun. As always. You know, that's what I always say. But this one, for real, I am in the editing process. I'm excited to share it. Either way, as always, I appreciate your support. Thank you very much for watching. And I will catch you in the next one.